Welcome back to the Disclosure Team YouTube channel. I'm your host, Vinny Adams, and today my guest and myself, we're going to be taking somewhat of a deep dive into the 1993 Cosford incident. Now, this case, for anybody that has heard of it, is usually associated with black triangles and things like that, but myself and David are going to sort of go into some of the details that are less often talked about but seriously, really important points. So let's bring in my guest. Welcome back, David. How are you?
I'm fine. Hello again.
Good to see you, as always.
Another deep dive.
Another deep dive. Well, it seems that a lot of these UK cases, people have heard the names, but there's very little detail known about them. And I just think it's worth just setting the record straight somewhat on what people should be focusing on when they hear these names. So, yeah, if you don't mind, can you just give us kind of the brief overview of what the Cosford incident really is all about and what happened?
Yeah, I'm not really sure why it's called the Cosford incident. I mean, there was one of the sightings was at RAF Cosford, which is a RAF airbase in the West Midlands, and it was by a military police patrol. But their sighting isn't really massively spectacular. They were just out on the airfield and they saw the same as a lot of other people saw two bright white, golden sort of coloured lights, what appeared to be reasonably low in the sky. But again, this is the problem. With witness descriptions when people are trying to estimate how far and how high something is. I think because of them being military police, that's why this has become known as the Cosford incident. But it's a classic UFO flap. I think that's what we can say. That happened almost exactly 30 years ago. And I think all in all, there was about 70 witnesses to this event, and it was in the early hours of the morning of the 30th, 31st of March, 1993. And the interesting thing about it is we just put our clocks forward from Greenwich Mean Time to British Summer Time. So this is one of the things that confuses the witness testimony, because some of the people, particularly the military witnesses, and there were quite a few military witnesses to this sighting, gave their descriptions and times in what's written as Zulu hours, and what that means is they're still giving sort of British GMT when it should have been British summertime, which is 1 hour later. Yeah. So the local time, the time of most of the sightings was, I think, about 10 past 1, quarter past 1 in the morning, whereas the people who were reporting it in the GMT were giving it as just after midnight. So that's where you get this idea that there's a spread of sightings, that there were things going on all through the night, which isn't strictly true. And also, people misremember the time. So what did people see, basically? And there was a host of sightings stretching from South Wales, Devon and Cornwall, a lot in the West Midlands around Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Shropshire. There was some outlying sightings up in South Yorkshire. I think there was a police patrol that saw something like a big glass-bottomed object with lights in a triangle, something of that kind. And at the time, people thought that this was something that was just confined to the UK. So the Ministry of Defence, and it was Nick Pope who was on the UFO desk at the time, you can imagine what was waiting for him when he arrived at work the next morning. You know, there'd be mountains of signals, calls, messages, all of them giving different times and locations, and he did his best to try and pull some of this together and make sense of it. What he didn't realise at the time, and this has only come to light later, was that there were also sightings in Ireland. The Irish Defence Corps had two really good sightings. In fact, they one of them was from a helicopter, which reported what they'd seen as almost like a near miss near Shannon Airport, again around this sort of 10 past 1 in the morning. And there were sightings in France, there were sightings in Spain. And looking at that now, in retrospect, any ufologist, anyone that sort of has got a good knowledge of what the cause of UFO sightings tends to be, if you've got lots and lots of people like that reporting something right across Europe, it's something very, very high in the sky. So what is it? Is it a meteorite burning up in the atmosphere? We've had a lot of really good cases of this, haven't we? Recently, things captured on cameras on people's doors and on car cams, that kind of thing. So it's either going to be a meteorite or it's going to be space junk. And in this case, we know because this has again been well documented that the Russians put up a communication satellite into orbit on the night of the 30th of March, Cyclone, or also known as Cosmos 2238, and it was launched by 2 rockets. And those rockets fell back into orbit around the Earth, re-entered, and they burnt up. And this is what people saw. This is what the police patrol saw at RAF Cosford, and it was seen as 2 brilliant white lights in formation with a big vapor trail, and they were visible for a long period of time, comparatively, 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm going to say it's one of the few sightings, this one, mass sightings, where a famous UFO writer actually witnessed it. I don't know whether you've heard of a guy called Peter Brooksmith.
Doesn't ring a bell, no.
He was a very well-known writer. He'd written 2 or 3 books on UFOs. One of them with Paul Devereaux called UFOs in Ufology. I've got to say, he's a particularly well-known skeptic, but he was out at 1 a.m. He lives in the Welsh mountains, somewhere up in the Preselles, and he was walking his dog, and he saw these 2 lights in the sky at just after 1 a.m, and couldn't. And he was perplexed. He couldn't work out what they were. He thought they were military aircraft initially. And he wrote a piece about it in one of his books. So how often is it you actually get a well-known ufologist at the time, anyway, who actually sees something that's been seen by lots of other people in a random sort of sighting flap of this kind?
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often at all.
Cosford incident, in summary, really.
Yeah, no, that's it. So I guess, obviously Nick Pope, SecAS were taking calls, and they were getting a lot of information coming in. So what happened from there? How did this become more than it really should have been?
Well, what happened then is there were 2 files on this case that were released at the National Archives. One of them was the SecAS file, which is the one that Nick Pope compiled, which is full of lots of sort of scribbled notes. He actually he asked the RAF radar to look at the radar tapes for the evening and to see if anything unusual had been picked up. And don't forget, this is the time when there was still a lot of speculation about this, the mythical hypersonic spy plane Aurora. So there was. This is in the aftermath of the Calvin incident and all the questions in Parliament about were the US Air Force flying a reconnaissance plane over the UK. And also, what seems to have been significant with Nick Pope is there'd been a lot of speculation, a lot of letters written into him about the Belgian flap that had happened in 1990. And he makes a link with the things that have been seen in Belgium being triangular shaped. He seems to have got it in his head that this thing that had been seen in 1993 was also triangular. And the Belgian flap, coincidentally, happened on the 30th of March. And I remember when I first read his book, Open Skies, Closed Minds, which was published in 1996, sort of 2 years after he'd left the UFO desk and moved on to another branch of the MOD. And he puts a very peculiar line in there. I don't know whether he was joking or what, but he said something about, isn't it peculiar that both the Belgian flap and this Cosford flap both happened on the 30th, 31st of March, almost as if like there was an intelligence that was controlling these sightings, that knew that the sightings would be reported in the media and the press on the 1st of April, which, as everyone knows, is April Fool's Day. So no one would take it seriously. And I even to this day, I just think, was he joking or what? It's like some kind of bizarre pun. But, it's just one of those coincidences. But you can't get away from the fact that Nick Pope is the person who propelled this flap into a classic case. And it's been described as such in the in the tabloid media over and over again, you know, like in the top 3 British cases now, because this is what Nick Pope has said it is, are Rendlesham, Cosford, and possibly Calvin now. But I think it's a very poor classic case, because as we've just seen, it's an IFO, it's an identified flying object, not an unidentified one. And what's been forgotten in all the discussion about this is that back in the 1990s, we had a very active national association, the British UFO Research Association, which is still ongoing, but in the 90s, its director of investigations was Jenny Randalls, and she was really, really on the case with this one. She was inundated with sighting reports as well, and there was a chap in southwest England called Doug Cooper who collated a lot of the reports from Devon and Cornwall, sent them to Jenny, and Jenny had an overview of what had gone on not only in the UK, but she'd also had some of these reports from Ireland. And I'm just reading here from a report that she did for 14 Times on this. And she says, she was coordinating the event at Bufora, and I soon concluded that the main sighting had to be caused by the burn-up of the space junk, and she'd actually checked this out straight away. Russia had launched an ocean reconnaissance mission from Baikonur around the time of the alleged sightings, and it was known as Cosmos 2238, and the satellite's twin rocket boosters fell to Earth and burnt up just after 1 a.m. But NORAD, you know, the North Atlantic Command that links up North America with the UK, they weren't initially aware of it. So when Nick Pope made his initial inquiries via Fylingdales, they didn't know about it. It hadn't sort of registered on their computer systems at that point. So that's why I think he was sent off on a wrong trail initially. And she says in her summary, this seems to be a highly impressive encounter. And as has been speculated, the number of witnesses does help prove that the incident was real, and clearly it was. But ironically, in UFO terms, the true strangeness of a sighting is often in inverse proportion to the number of witnesses. So what she's saying there, and I agree with her, is the more sightings that you have, as in this case, the more likely it is to be something, either a natural phenomenon like a meteor burning up or space junk. The fewer witnesses you have, the more likely it is to be something that is genuinely inexplicable. So
no, absolutely, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And she'd had a lot of experience of these kinds of things, because there's a very famous case that happened on New Year's Eve in 1978, when another Russian rocket body burnt up over the UK, and it was seen by literally hundreds of people, a lot more than in 1993. And the MOD did an entire case study of this, and so did Bufora. And again, what happened was, people who reported it, you got widely varying times. There were people saying it was 9:30. There were people saying it was 10:30. Remember, this is New Year's Eve. People are out drinking and celebrating, and had a few to drink. You know, don't necessarily make a clear note of when they saw what they saw. And this was like a giant sort of trail of light in the sky. Again, rocket body burning up. And if you read some of the accounts from 1978, people said they saw portholes in it. They saw it as a cigar-shaped object. And you could make a case that maybe the UFO intelligences knew that this rocket body was going to burn up, and they thought, right, well, we'll come in at exactly the same time in our cigar-shaped object with portholes, and everybody will say that it's a rocket body when really it was a UFO. So, I mean, but what are the chances of that, Vinny?
Well, that's it. Case? Yeah. You know, some people will be more likely to believe that would be the case than others. So, but yeah, I don't really buy that.
So, if you want to bring up the NASA computer simulation, this really just put the case to bed. Really, what happened was Gary Anthony, who was a very active UFO researcher at the time, who was a friend of mine, he was the astronomy consultant for Bufora, and he had some very high up contacts in NASA. One of whom was Dr. Nick Johnson, and he actually managed to obtain a computer program that simulated. I mean, this is real high tech for 1997 or whenever it was he did it, and he actually replayed the NASA satellite computer images of that particular night and managed to get a screen grab, which is what you're looking at here. And as you can see, it very clearly shows at 10 past 1 in the morning, you can see what looks like a the ISS. I think they've actually used the symbol for the ISS.
Oh, here, yeah.
Just here. Yeah, slap bang over southwest England.
Yeah. And then I guess this trajectory line here
that's
is where it comes over Ireland.
Comes over Ireland. Yeah.
And then across sort of southwest England. But I think as well, it says in some of the documentation I was reading that the visibility could have been seen from a lot further away, more like the Midlands and that, because just clear views right up into the sky, you know, so it's not just across directly above that trajectory line. So I mean that just shows you right into Europe as well.
France,
Spain,
part of Spain. And so, disappeared off over North Africa.
But that's not the end of it, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not that cut and dry.
No, because all these sightings were compiled in this Cosford incident file, which Nick Pope copied to his opposite number in DI-55. And on this occasion, DI-55 seemed to have played the more passive role in that Nick did most of the investigation. Can we even call it an investigation? Because he never left his desk. All of this was just done from collating bits of paper and making the occasional phone call. He didn't actually hop in his car and drive out and speak to anyone. If you can call it an investigation, it was done entirely over the phone and copying bits of paper to other MOD departments. So in actual fact, the civilian ufologists, people like Doug Cooper, Jenny Randalls, Peter Brooksmith, they were the ones who actually did more of an investigation because they were actually out in the field talking to people, as did some of the journalists who wrote it up at the time. So what you got when all these sighting reports were all sort of listed, and he tried to plot them on a map and draw arrows. You can see it if you download the file from the National Archives website. Some of those descriptions and accounts are actually in error, because you've got people saying that they said that they thought these things were, you know, like 1,000 feet a high or 500 feet. I mean, and it's anyone who studied eyewitness testimony, particularly of lights that someone had seen in the dark of night, where you've got no reference points. You see a light. How on earth are you going to know whether it's at 5,000 feet, 50,000 feet? You just can't make a. So it's all guesstimates, really. So not only have you got that problem, but you've also got lots of scattered itty-bitty sightings, some of them earlier in the same evening. So on the night of the 30th, i.e. before midnight on the 31st, and you've got some in the early hours sometime after the big concentration around 1 in the morning. Now, Nick Pope seems to have sort of come round to the fact, reluctantly, that the main cluster of sightings can be explained by the Cosmos satellite, although it depends what mood he's in and what side of the bed he's got out of, because sometimes you see him interviewed and he says, oh, it's completely inexplicable, one of the classic unexplained sightings, and he knows full well it's not unexplained. And if you read some of the correspondence in the actual Ministry of Defence files, there's one particular letter from Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos, who's a very well-known Spanish ufologist, and he had actually received a whole spate of sightings from Spain, and he'd gone down a similar route to Gary Anthony and got the NASA trajectory, and he'd actually sent this to Nick Pope at the MOD while he was still on the UFO desk, and Nick Pope actually writes back to him and says, yes, I accept that the vast majority of these sightings can be explained by the Cosmos re-entry. So I don't understand how this can be a classic UFO, but he would say, yes, but it doesn't explain the low-level sightings.
Yeah, but that's
earlier in the night and later in the night.
Yeah, I saw something from him the other day because it is this 30th anniversary. You know, he said he was tasked with investigating this incident, and by the end of the investigation, it was not. There were no, good conclusions that could explain all of the sightings of that night.
Yeah.
So, I think he's still hanging on to those sightings that fall outside of the hours where, you can easily say it was this re-entry. So I think that's worth us then switching our attention to, because there's one in particular. I'll let you go. Which one you want to?
Yeah, the one that gets the most attention is a sighting that happened later in the evening. Now, if you read Nick Pope's account of this, this is the sighting by the meteorological officer, RAF Shawbury, which was a helicopter training base in the West Midlands in Shropshire. And it's about 20 miles as the crow flies from Cosford. So let me set this up. The police at Cosford have this sighting at 1:15 of the two bright lights. They're getting a real tiz about this. They obviously think it's something that needs flagging up, that needs reporting to higher authorities. And they had a call from, I think it was a family living somewhere on Cannock Chase, who'd seen what was clearly the same thing, but they'd seen it in a wooded area, and to them it appeared it had landed, and they'd obviously got really worried about it, and they'd phoned RAF Cosford, who'd their own RAF police had seen this thing. So the police at Cosford then rang the copter base at Shawbury, which had actually shut down for the night, so their operations had ended. And Shawbury is a base where you've got Gazelles and Wessex helicopters. So the only person on the base after 1 o'clock in the morning was this chap called Wayne Elliott, who was the meteorological observer. And he, as a meteorological observer, would go out every half hour, every hour, or whatever it is, to take observations. And I don't know whether you can put up his scribbled thing from the logbook, and he actually records the times of the sightings that were made, because he then.
Is that the one that says 3 possible sightings? Is it
yes,
that one?
That's the one. Yeah, yeah. So this is the Met Office log from RAF Shawbury, which was compiled by Wayne Elliott. And as you can see there, 3 possible sightings of UFO. So he's got 009Z, 003Z. Again, the timings are all out, because we know now that isn't in British summertime. It should be an hour later.
Yeah.
So the 4 people at Stafford is the family that I've mentioned. The 2 RAF personnel at Cosford, we know their sighting was at 1:10 a.m., not at midnight. midnight. So you can see where the confusion is creeping in. So his sighting he's got at 0140, but actually that's not being corrected either. That should be 2:40.
Yeah,
that should be 2:40 British summertime. So what happened was, he got the call from Cosford saying, "Oh, we've had this sighting ourselves, and we've had this further report from Stafford. There's a UFO. It's coming your way." So what did he do? He went outside to look.
Yeah.
And I think he made a couple of attempts. And then he saw what appeared to be like a cluster of lights over a hill in the distance. 2 red lights and I think a green light. And he watched this thing, and it appeared to be sort of approaching the airbase, and it came lower and lower and lower, and it was quite low and making a loud humming noise. And he described it to Nick Pope at the time as a very large object, somewhere between a C-130 and a 747 jet. So that is large. And it was projecting a beam of light down onto the hillside as if it was searching for something. And this, as he came out, it went over the runway and overhead. So that's the sighting that he reported. And again, you might want to bring this up on screen. He actually was interviewed by the Met Office magazine, who published an account of it under the lurid title "The Met Ox Files," because the X Files were on TV at the time. And although his name is removed, that's the one. Yeah, spooky sightings in Shropshire. And as you can see, although his name has been blacked out of the official file, they actually name him there. So that's how I found out who he was. Right. So his name is in the public domain. I mean, the Met Office magazine is a published magazine with his name in it. So as you can see, he tells the story there, and this was, I think, published. I don't know how long afterwards, but not all that long. Maybe
July, August '96.
Yeah, so some years afterwards. So obviously, this is where the problems of memory start coming into this and getting times and events in the wrong order. And if you listen to Nick Pope's retelling of this story, you have the Cosford police seeing these lights in the sky. They phone Wayne Elliott. Wayne Elliott takes the call. There's a UFO coming your way. He goes outside and sees the UFO, right?
Right.
The same thing that's traveled 20 miles from Cosford. But when you actually carefully look at the times and you correct the times for British summertime, the sightings at Cosford are at 1:15 or 1:10 in the morning. Wayne Elliott's sighting was at 2:40, i.e. 1.5 hours later.
Right.
So this fantastic high-performance UFO took an hour and a half to travel the 20 miles from Cosford to Shawbury. So, folks, we're talking about UFO here. You're talking about something that was seen at Cosford, and you're talking about something that was seen at Shawbury. But I think anyone with common sense would conclude, based upon that, it is the two separate things. That whatever Wayne Elliott saw wasn't the same thing as was seen at Cosford. And this is where all these things start getting lumped together. And particularly when you get tabloid newspapers involved in writing up stories like this, and you get TV programs, because there was a notorious Channel 5 program that was made on Cosford that I had the misfortune of being involved in briefly. That, again, the way it was presented didn't point out any of these facts. So you watch the program and you think, oh yeah, fantastic, yeah, there was all these sightings, even though it didn't interview any witnesses. I think just one witness. And you come away from that thinking, oh yeah, it's there was these sightings. It couldn't possibly have been a satellite booster burn up because that was too high in the sky and this, that, and the other. But when you, as you do, if you take this subject seriously, you put the actual documentary evidence under scrutiny, under the microscope. It's not as it's been told. There is the story as it's been told, and there are the facts, and the two diverge the more you look at them.
No, absolutely. And this is the thing. When I first heard about this case, it was this meteorological officer stood outside looking up at this giant triangle going over his head. And of course, I'm like, oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. I want to know more about this case. But I didn't look into it until a few years later. But that's where this has really come from, this triangular craft and the time differences, like you say, of this thing shooting 20 miles in what initially people were saying was a minute or a matter of seconds, but it wasn't. And this is why these cases need to be looked at properly so that we can put them to one side and actually go and focus on other things that we don't need these cases hanging around for years and years. So I think
it might be worth talking about Wayne Elliott and the fact that I contacted him when I was looking into this in 2005, and he gave an on-the-record interview about what he remembered about it, and it really opened my eyes. And what led me to try and track him down was there was a letter in the Daily Mail. Again, you might want to bring this up on screen, Vinny. This is from a military, I think an RAF person who was actually on RAF Cosford base at the time. And he, like everyone else, had heard Nick Pope's account of this incredible. I mean, I remember listening to him. I went to see him at the science festival in Newcastle, and he was talking about the Shawbury sighting, and it was, to use his own words, a vast triangular-shaped craft flying at about 200 feet that made a low-frequency humming noise and fired a narrow beam of light which swept the ground. Sounds impressive, but
yeah. Am I bringing up? Sorry, is it the small newspaper clipping?
Yeah, bring up the newspaper cutting. Yeah, this was published in the Daily Mail in 2005 in response to a big piece about the Shawbury sighting. So Norman Fitch, he'd got friends at RAF Cosford, and he just dropped this in. A UFO supposedly seen March 31st, 1993, was later identified as a Dovid Powys police helicopter following a stolen car down the A5 between the A49 junction and Nestcliff. And anyone who's seen a police helicopter knows that they use these night suns, which can be pretty dazzling if you see them searching fields. The friend who operates from RAF Shawbury adds, the humming noise and high G manoeuvring seems to have been the effect of an overactive imagination, almost certainly fueled by a couple of snifters in the mess. Now, I'm sure he's not talking about the Met officer here, because Wayne Elliott's account was very clear and very precise. And so I having seen this, I just thought, this is interesting. So I put in freedom of information requests to both the Dyfed-Powys police and to, I think it was West Mercia, because both of them operated police helicopters at the time. So I asked them, have you got your logbooks from 1993? And unfortunately, as anyone who's tried to get this kind of information out of the police, they don't keep logbooks and information for that length of time. Remember, I was checking this out in 2005 about an event that happened 12 years earlier. So although it sounds a good idea, we could not say for definite that that's what was happening. So I thought, okay, I'll get in touch with Wayne Elliott and I'll put this to him. And of course, Nick Pope's attitude was, this was a helicopter base. They were flying Wessex and Gazelle helicopters. How could someone who was based there, who sees helicopters every day, be mistaken if it was a police helicopter? Well, the same argument was used at Rendlesham, wasn't it? How could the airmen, who must have seen the flashing searchlight on the Orford Ness lighthouse, spend 2 hours chasing a flashing light before they realised it was a lighthouse? But that is what happened. And if you're in a forest at night, it's dark, and you see a flashing light, all kinds of weird things can appear to happen. You know, if you're disorientated and you don't know the location. Now, you may want to read what Wayne Elliott told me, because I took it down in shorthand and transcribed it thereafter, and I was stunned by what he said.
It's quite lengthy, but I will read it all because I think it's important. So this is notes from the phone conversation with Wayne Elliott from the Met Office, 29th of March 2005. I was an observer at the station at the time. I got a call from the MOD police at Cosford to say this family had seen something land in a field and had a close look at the craft, which had then shot off, and they were really scared. The police at Cosford had also seen this, and they had received dozens of calls from people in the West Country who had seen something similar. At the time, I knew nothing of the existence of Nick Pope or the MOD UFO unit. Cosford made the inquiries and spoke to me about it, and my account went to Pope secondhand via them. We were always receiving calls about UFOs, and I didn't think anything of it at all. They alerted me, but I had not seen anything. It wasn't until I went out to take the hourly observation that I saw two white lights in the eastern sky, which would be towards Cosford. They stopped to the north of the airfield over the hill I used to make some of my Met observations, which was about 7 kilometers away. They stayed there for about 10 minutes, and I then saw what appeared to be a beam of light scanning the hillside beneath it. It stayed there for quite some time, and I was about to give up and go back in. Then suddenly the beam of light switched off, and it flew off across the airfield. It would be about 1,000 feet. The noise was odd, I thought. It was not what you would hear from a fast jet, as I was used to seeing tornadoes and Harriers. I have also seen military helicopters at Shawbury, as Shawbury was a copter base, and it seemed to go too fast for a copter. I would have said it was more like a fixed-wing aircraft. There was no one else around at the time. It did not strike me as being something familiar. However, looking at the time, I saw it was clearly not the same thing as was seen at Cosford and elsewhere, as it was much later than I saw it. I never made anything of it. I just reported what I had seen. But Nick Pope has made a lot of it and put it in his book. I spoke to him afterwards. He rang me up and he assured me that he had checked with all the military sources for aircraft and ruled them out. I just believed him. I remember he questioned me about the shape. This was in reference to what the family in Rugeley had seen earlier. He said, could it have been triangular? And I said, it could have been, which was a bit of a leading question, I suppose. But I was just a Met officer and this was the guy from the MOD. Nick Pope was very excited about it and made a great deal of the fact that I was an official observer, etc., which was true. He had been running with it ever since. He said he had checked all the official records. In 1996, when his book came out, everyone was asking questions about it, and a film crew came over from Australia and filmed me talking about it at the Met Office. They also filmed Pope at the flat where he lived with his mum in London, but in the end, they never used the footage in the show. I was always fairly ambivalent about it. I believed what I was told at the time, but now I'm convinced that what I saw has been explained. Having now seen the letter in the Daily Mail, I have to agree it was possible that I saw a police helicopter. The noise like a humming and the beam of light are very similar. Also, the A39 road they mentioned was in exactly the same place that I saw the object originally. In fact, that road cuts right through the hill where it was hovering. What I did not see were red and green lights, which you would expect from a helicopter. The lights I saw were both white. So, I mean,
there you go.
Yeah. This is the witness himself, you know, sort of saying, yeah, that's pretty much what I saw, I suppose.
Yeah.
And, you know, if he'd have seen a genuine giant triangle the size of a 747, he'd still be saying that here. No, it was definitely huge and triangular. And, you know, it seems that those words were put in his mouth, you know.
Possibly. I mean, we maybe he did see something inexplicable. I mean, the police helicopter is only a theory, and there is another possibility. And this is something that Chris Fowler was talking about on social media a few days ago, and I'd completely forgotten about it. That I mentioned earlier that Nick Pope had asked the RAF to do they actually got the radar tapes from a base called Clee Hill, which is the nearest radar ground sort of scanning radar in that area, and they'd done like a rerun of the radar tapes for that particular evening at Nick Pope's request, which is quite an unusual thing for them to do. And they produced like a big list of things that you could see from the radar tapes, and there were nothing unusual on there. And the conclusions on it read, unfortunately, I would say there was nothing unusual seen on the radar recordings. And that seems to be a conclusion. But if you actually look at it, as Gary Anthony did, the very last item that they've listed, number 9, Clee Hill, there's a squawk, which is an actual response from an actual aircraft, descending on the A25 overhead Shawbury. And that's at precisely the time, corrected to British summertime, that the meteorological officer saw his UFO. So actually there on the radar display at exactly the time there's an aircraft on radar descending over Shawbury. Now that would have been quite high in the sky, you know, several maybe 20,000 feet, something like that. I don't know. And again, Nick Pope, when he was challenged about this, I think on the Channel 5 program, said, "Oh yeah, because I was aware of that, saw it on the radar thing." But you know, the Met Office guy said he saw this thing really low in the sky. You know, 500 feet, 2,000 feet. But again, it's so easy to misidentify something that looks low in the sky that might not be low in the sky. It all depends on meteorological conditions. And, you know, things can be very deceiving, even to someone who is familiar with aircraft working on an airfield. And what is often not taken into account here is the UFO state of mind. If he'd just wandered out and seen these lights, he'd probably have just said, it's an aircraft. But what we're forgetting there is he'd had this excited phone call only a short time before from RAF Cosford saying, we've just seen this UFO. We've had this family say they've seen it land. So he was actually primed when he went out and saw these lights to think that's the UFO, even though it was an hour and a half later.
But that's the thing, because they calculated that it had flown at Mach 2 plus when they'd got the times wrong. So we've got this giant triangular craft that's going at Mach 2 plus that's been seen by multiple witnesses.
Yeah.
This is a big UFO story building here, where if you look at all the facts, when you actually get them into order, they all trickle away and you're back to just prosaic explanations. And this is why I find it frustrating that these things don't get talked about, researched and discussed enough, because, you know, that's right, they're 30 odd years ago, it doesn't matter anymore, but it does.
It does, Vinny, yeah. There's lessons to be learned from this. I mean, if you want to investigate UFOs and you believe that there is something real and genuinely inexplicable, as I do, you've got to be able to show that you've got a very sort of clear methodology for eliminating things that aren't inexplicable, that you can explain. And you can almost see a flap like this as almost like a training exercise. whereby, you know, and this is what Bufora, Jenny Randalls, Gary Anthony, they were a great sort of bunch of people back in the 90s. And, you know, they were really on this as soon as it happened. They'd explained it. The bizarre thing was that Nick Pope and the Ministry of Defence were so baffled by it for so long. I can only assume it's because they had a will to believe that might have been sort of generated by what had gone on before with the Calvin photograph and all the speculation about Aurora. Because when Nick Pope writes his report and he flags it up to his head of division and he copies it to DI-55, it's all framed in this. Perhaps we ought to ask the Americans about this, whether they were operating something over the UK that we don't know about. I mean, again, if there's a couple of extracts from his report you might want to show.
That one there.
Yeah, this is his conclusion. Given what he said, the summary of what happened, it would not seem sufficient to simply write these sightings off. Seems that an unidentified object of unknown origin was operating in the UK air defence region without being detected on radar, and it would appear to be of considerable defence significance, and I recommend that we investigate further within MOD or with the US authorities. So again, why the US authorities? Again, it's obviously a reference to the suspicion that was shared by his head of division, the head of SEC-AS, and by the DI-55 desk officer, that the Americans were flying something that they weren't telling us about. And this, again, harks back to what had gone on before with the Belgian flap and the Calvin photographs and the rumours about something being based at RAF Machrihanish that the Americans are operating in secrecy. So it seems to have fed into the Cosford flap in 1993. Now, all that stuff was copied as far as the Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, a very senior RAF official, who basically looked at it and said, "I've made contact with the Americans, and they didn't have anything flying." And you can see someone has said there. You can see the scribble
at the top here.
Two lots of scribble. One of them is Nick Pope's handwriting.
This one's Pope here, yeah.
The far right is Nick Pope's, and the one at the side is his boss, who was the real head of the UFO desk. And as you can see, thank you. I suggest you now drop this subject. So he's basically saying, "Yeah, good job, Nick. You've done all you can. Now let's drop it, please."
Absolutely. And I mentioned to you before we came on, we were talking about it, and you know, it would have been DI-55 that would have done any proper investigation going out into the field, but they didn't even bother.
No, I mean, their file on this case was released at the National Archives just last year, but I'd had a copy of it since about 2005, and I was really disappointed when I got it, because it's just the photocopies of the same stuff that's in Nick Pope's file with a couple of extra sheets saying, "Did a UFO visit the UK?" They'd clearly not fallen down on the job a bit on this one. They hadn't actually done anything more with it. And they did contact Fylingdales. Now, RAF Fylingdales in North Yorkshire, which coincidentally I drove past only a couple of nights ago on my way back from Whitby. That's the big sort of early warning station that's got the over-the-horizon radar that looks out towards the distant horizon. And they're the ones who plot objects in orbit. And Nick Pope, you can see from the file, he did contact them, and they did confirm that this Cosmos rocket body had burnt up. But they gave him the time in GMT, i.e. just after midnight, rather than correcting it for British summertime. So all the clues to solve this case were staring the Ministry of Defence in their face, and they seem to have completely disregarded them and gone off on this weird tangent that it was either the Aurora spy plane or some mysterious craft from outer space. And I think there's an element of a want to believe going on here. And don't forget, this is the era just when I think it was later in 1993, or was it 94 when the X-Files premiered on British TV?
I think in the UK it was 94, but I think it was 93 in the US.
Yeah. So there was a big buzz about the whole subject at this time, and I think there was several people at the Ministry of Defence who wanted to believe, not just Nick Pope at the time, and I think that's fed into how this case has been transformed from what is a pretty uninteresting group of sightings of lights in the sky, which in any other context, even the most seasoned ufologists would have concluded this is space junk. There's lots of other examples of similar examples of this, and of course, if you pick a night or 2 nights randomly in any calendar year, and let's use the Ministry of Defence UFO files, because if you go and you download those files from there, it pretty much covers from about 1987 to 1997. You can just pick a sample of dates. You will find any random date. You will find that there'll be a sighting at 8 o'clock in West Midlands. There'll be a sighting at 11:30 in Kent. There'll be another one at midnight in Scotland. So what? They're all caused by different things.
Yeah.
So in this particular instance, you've got this massive cluster of probably 70 or 80 witness reports around 1 in the morning. And then you've got a few before midnight down in the southwest, which I think it's been suggested that some of those may have been Royal Navy Sea King helicopters that we know were operating from Europe.
Yeah, I've got here, it says 30th of March 93, 2 Sea King helicopters flying from RNAS Yeovilton were active in a low-flying area up until midnight.
Yeah. So potentially some of the sightings down in the southwest that Doug Cooper collected, I think there was a couple of fishermen who were out elving in the Somerset levels, and they saw something like a big glass bottom thing, weirdly shaped object with lights in a triangular formation. That's one of the ones that Nick Pope has sort of picked out as being can't be explained by the Russian rocket body. Well, nobody's suggesting that it was, but it could have been one of these Sea King helicopters or something else of that nature. It just because it happened then, it doesn't mean to say it was connected with either the Cosford report or the Cosford or the Shawbury one, which was later in the evening. So these are all random sightings, all caused by lots of different things that have all been lumped together into what's become known as the Cosford incident.
Yeah, and I mean, I was looking at old Daily Star and the Sun articles because that's where it gets repeated every few years, and it was literally showing maps of triangles going triangle plotted going from northwest England down all, and it's like this is how these things get so blown out of proportion that this is, again, I'll reiterate, this is why these cases need bringing back up, looking into again, and really setting the record straight, because it just muddies the waters of this subject, which are muddy enough as it is. So I think that's why we needed to. I wanted to highlight this. So yeah, I think have we covered everything with regards to that?
I think so. Yeah. But as you say, Vinny, this is like one of those fairground things, isn't it? Where you're given a big hammer and you have to sort of knock the little guys that are sticking up, and as soon as you knock one, another one comes up. So it's like you can't kill it. This story, because it's been in the tabloids, and because the former head of the Ministry of Defence's UFO desk keeps banging on about it, it's going to achieve mythical status. It's impossible to kill it off, even though when you put it under the microscope, it just falls to pieces.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'd love it to be a genuine exotic huge triangle, but that wouldn't be me doing what I need to be doing, which is looking at it properly with the right head on my shoulders. So apologies to anybody out there. Well, no, I'm not sorry, in fact. But I'm just following the data, and I think that's what everybody needs to do on every single case, and not let their biases and stuff play in and cause too much glariness.
In those files, there are plenty of other, far more mysterious, inexplicable accounts of sightings and experiences than this one. And it just pains me that so much time and energy is wasted on something that was explained and has been explained adequately. Yeah, so it just distracts from the really good case evidence that is there, 100%. That tends to get ignored.
Yeah. I need to take another visit down to the archives and find some of these cases, because there's some gems in there. There really is. But, well, listen, David, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who is watching, this is the last video that I am making before I head back out to Colombia. But I will be uploading some interesting content from Colombia, let's say. I won't say too much. And then we've heard also rumors of some more hearings happening potentially in April in the US, so there may well be some content coming out regarding those. Again, watch this space. But for now, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. David, thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.